Welcome to the Friday Men's Breakfast Podcast, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. In this week's lesson from the book of 2 Samuel, Dale South, the Associate Pastor of Groups at the Williamsburg Community Chapel, takes us through more of David's victories over his enemies. So, grab your Bibles and open them to 2 Samuel chapter 10, and join us as we continue to learn how the life of King David leads us to the life of King Jesus.
But have you ever set out to do something that you intended as kindness, to be kind, to be encouraging, only to have the recipient misinterpret your intentions and perhaps become hostile to you? Yeah. I could have probably just asked the question, are any of you guys married? Because I know I do that with my wife sometimes. She'll say something in kindness. I mean, what's your angle here, woman? And I think sometimes she's probably questioned me, why was I being kind when she wasn't expecting it or trying to be. So anyway, there's often, our motives are mixed at times, right? And we confuse things, and sometimes we attribute things to people that aren't really accurate for them. We attribute motives to people, and I think that's a very dangerous thing. Yeah. We're going to see that even in the text here this morning. I'm just going to work this passage from 2 Samuel 10 verses at a time as we go through. Just going to read verses 1 through 2a here to start with. Sometime later, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent his emissaries to console Hanun concerning his father. So as we look back at this passage here, it's significant to note that it says, now it happened afterwards. In verse 1, now it happened afterwards. After what? I wasn't able to be here last Friday, but I did listen to the message, and I know the passage there. But what are we talking about? Now afterwards, what was before? Mephibosheth, right? We're right on the heels of Mephibosheth here. And refers back to David seeking out and inviting who? Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, the only descendant of Saul that was left here. And David wanted to invite Mephibosheth so that he could bless him. And he gave him back his father's land, and he regularly invited him to his table to be pretty much one of the family. Now, here David learns that the Ammonite king Nahash has died. And King Nahash had shown kindness to David when David was fleeing from King Saul's jealous rage. You can go back in the passages earlier and read about that story there. But so just as David had reached out and shown kindness to Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, that is just what happened before in chapter 9 of 2 Samuel. Now it happened afterwards, right after that David also wanted to show kindness to Nahash's son, the one succeeding his father to the throne, whose dad had just died. And so the relationship between the Ammonites and the people of Israel had a long history with seasons of warring against one another, and then some other times when things thawed out and there was a little bit more warmth of relationship there. And David had, with that time with King Nahash, kind of built up a bit of a rapport and a friendship with him. And so David sent this delegation to offer condolences and consolation to Nahash's son Hanun. Now, when Nahash invited David in, we don't know about his motives for that. It could have been, well, David is now the enemy of Saul, and it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We don't really know why he took him in, but he did, and they did develop a bit, again, of a genuine concern, at least on David's part, for Nahash and his family. So let's refresh ourselves just a little bit on who these people called the Ammonites were and how they had related to the people of Israel. Now, the Ammonites, do you remember their lineage, who they came from? They came through the youngest son of Lot, right? And who was Lot? Lot was Abraham's nephew. Now, do you recall how this youngest son of Lot came to be? Well, Lot had to leave Sodom and Gomorrah. There was fire and brimstone coming down. They were running away. And God said, don't look back. And Lot's wife looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. So that left Lot and his two daughters on the run. Lot was terrified. He went to the city of Zoar, but he still was just terrified of being around people and all of the wickedness going on and what he had passed through already. So he takes his daughters up into the hills, and they basically try to live in isolation from everybody. They live in a cave. And so one night, his daughters got him drunk because they said, there's nobody up here. There's no marriage prospects. There's nobody here that's going to be able to give us children. Nobody here to have a lineage. Nobody here to help take care of us in our older age. So his daughters got him drunk and seduced him. And their child that came as a result of that was a baby boy, and they named him Ben-Ami, which actually means the son of my people. And Ben-Ami, you can see that A-double-M there, Ami, with Ammonites, right? And so the Ammonites were the descendants of this incestually conceived son of Lot with his daughter, Ben-Ami. And you can read more about that in Genesis 19, 30 to 38, if you want to go make a note of that and go back in your quiet times and review that. But this is kind of as people were preparing to enter the promised land. They'd spent 400 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness. And then Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 16 to 19 says, so as soon as all the men of war had perished and were dead from among the people, the Lord said to me, today you are to cross the border of Moab at Ar. And when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, that would be these descendants of Ben-Ami, do not harass them or contend with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the sons of Lot for a possession. So God had already sort of delegated or relegated this land to the descendants of Lot there. And that's the region in the kind of the green in that first map there where you see Ammon down in the kind of lower right quadrant there. And so God was essentially warning the Israelites, don't mess with the Ammonites when you go there. Don't pick a fight. Don't try to take up their land. Just walk through in peace. But what we learn, though, is that the Ammonites really didn't take too kindly even to the Israelites walking across their land. And they wouldn't allow them to have any hospitality. They didn't go out with bread. They didn't go out with water for the people there to help them at all. And they actually hired a prophet, kind of a false prophet, Balaam. You remember the guy who had the talking donkey? Okay, that's the guy they hired. So they weren't making the best choices. So as we see the continuing a little bit with the Ammonites here, there was one of the judges named Jephthah who had his own issues with a daughter who came out of the house that he had kind of dedicated to the Lord there in a way questionable. But anyway, he was one of Israel's judges, and he saved the Israelites in a time of danger from the Ammonites. And so there was this warring back then going on with the Ammonites. King Saul also warred with the Ammonites. He defeated them. We see that earlier back in 1 Samuel. And as you look at the first map on the left of your handout there, you see the city of Ammon, kind of that I've kind of pointed out there to you. And that may sound familiar to you. Does that name Ammon sound familiar? If you pronounce the vowels just a little bit differently, you come up with it as Ammon, okay? So this is Amman, Jordan, still to this day. Okay, so there you can make some connections between the Ammonites and pretty much the ancient Jordanites, the people that would have been coming from that area. So to recap, David sent a delegation to offer condolences to this new Ammonite king, Hanun, who had just lost his father, Nahash, who, despite this on-again, off-again warring with Israel, had shown kindness to David in David's time of need. So we'll pick up there in verses 2b through 5 of chapter 10 in 2 Samuel there. It says, now David had sent the emissaries to console Hanun concerning his father. However, when they arrived in the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite leaders said to Hanun, their lord, just because David has sent men with condolences for you, do you really believe he's showing respect for your father? Instead, hasn't David sent his emissaries in order to scout out the city, spy on it, and to demolish it? So Hanun took David's emissaries, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes in half at the hips, and sent them away. And let's see, how far did I want to go there? I think I'm just going up to verse 5. We'll go there. So when this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them since they were deeply humiliated. And the king said, stay in Jericho until your beards grow back and then return. Okay. Now, for those of us who might be on the more cynical or sarcastic side, the big idea of these 5 verses could be declared as no good deed goes unpunished, right? David had meant to be doing something kind, and in return, his men just get humiliated here. And the advice the new king received from his princes was really unfortunate. It's hard to know whether they were paranoid, they really believed David was coming to try to take them over, or if they were just cynical and sinister and had malicious intent and wanted to kind of go ahead and pick a fight with David as they had this new malleable king, they thought, in their clutches here. In any case, they accused David's envoys who were sent to console the king of looking for a fight and being spies with malicious intent. So questioning again their motives, attributing bad to good motives. Now the Ammonites humiliated David's servants. They cut off half their beards. And if you look on the handout, let's read Leviticus 19:27 together. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or the edges of your beard. Now, I get the impression here that this was not like taking an 8-inch beard and just cutting off 6 inches of it and cutting off their beards in half. This was more probably like cutting off a side of your beard, okay, so that you would actually look ridiculous. And for the Israelites of that period, not having a beard was just really unmanly. Okay, every man had a beard, particularly any man who was going out to war. He was going to have a beard. The only reason you wouldn't have a beard is if you were a boy. Okay, boys don't have beards, but men have beards. You might also shave off your beard as part of a vow if you were in mourning, if you'd made this thing to God in mourning, and then you might shave it off if you were being punished or have it shaved off. So not having a beard was sort of just a sense of calling attention to yourself in a way that would be kind of an embarrassment. And even making a vow before the Lord where you shave your head and your beard off, that would let the whole world know, hey, this guy, something's going on here. He's either mourning or he's taking a vow, something's happening. Okay, so let's go on down to Numbers 15, 38 to 39 for a little bit more context of the clothing part here. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. Okay. Guys, when we start going after our own eyes and our own hearts, we start whoring after those, we're in trouble. So the idea was these little blue tassels at the bottom of your garment was going to be reminding you of the commandments of the Lord. And this was what the Torah instructed the Israelites to be wearing here as they went. So this altered clothing violated the Torah for the Israelites. Symbolically, the cutting of those blue tassels on each border of the garments was a desecration to the Jewish law. And the other, much more obvious humiliation was that the now half-bearded men were also left with half of their clothing, which left their genitals and their buttocks exposed for all the world to see. There was no jockey, no Hanes, no Tommy Johns. Okay, it was their garment or nothing else, right? They were commando under their garments. David had compassion on his disgraced men. And he was concerned about the humiliation they had suffered, trying to do a good thing, and yet this is what they got back in return. And so he said, go to Jericho, which happens to be the first town on the west side of the Jordan, right? So that was close, getting back into Israeli kind of territory there. Go there, let your beards grow out. I don't want you to have to come back home to your friends and family. It's better you be among unknown people and be humiliated than to be among your family and be humiliated here. So go ahead and let your beards grow back and then come back to your family. Now, as we read just verse 6 in 2 Samuel 10, going on to the next verse here, it says, when the Ammonites realized that they had become repulsive to David, they hired 20,000 foot soldiers from the Arameans of Beth Rehob and Zobah, 1,000 men from the king of Maacah, and 12,000 men from Tob. Okay. Now, it says here that when they realized, this is the Holman Christian Standard Version, that they had become repulsive to David, the text more literally says that they had become a stench to David. They went and they hired these mercenary folks to come and to help them because they said, the Israelites are going to want to pay back now. They're going to want to battle, and so we need some help. Let's take these guys out. So they went and got these Arameans or Syrians here. The ESV and the King James versions say the Ammonites enlisted the Syrians. Okay, but the Holman Christian Standard, the NIV, the New American Standard Bible say the Ammonites enlisted the help of the Arameans. Okay, and the word in the Hebrew is really Aramean. Okay, so that's the other translations trying to make it more applicable to us today because we know where Syria is. And so they're just kind of doing that little bit of a work for us. But it's really Arameans, and I think I like the Arameans as in terms of a translation. It's really what the text literally says. But what we learn here is that Arameans and Syrians, at least at this time period, were virtually synonymous. They were pretty much the same people, the Arameans and the Syrians. And Aram, to look back, was the grandson of Abraham's brother Nahor. Okay. And so again, we've got this kind of nephew-y thing going on with Abraham here, right? With Lot and now his brother's grandson, kind of a great nephew of Abraham as well. And we'll recall that Jacob went back there to this area to try to find a wife. He was sent back there to get a wife, and then he had to work 7 years for Leah, and he had to work 7 years to get Rachel before he took these two sisters back to Israel. And in fact, Deuteronomy 26:5 calls Jacob a wandering Aramean. Okay, so because he was wandering back there in this region of Aramea, waiting to be able to go back to his homeland. And another thing we find with the Arameans is what language did the Arameans speak? How about Aramaic? Okay. Now, Aramaic would have been a lot of the Hebrew Bible has Aramaic phrasing in it. Aramaic was the everyday language that Jesus and his disciples spoke with one another. Okay, they also knew Hebrew. They knew Greek, but their real language at heart was Aramaic. And so, the Ammonites actually now paid for the services of these Arameans and Syrians. And if you look at the second map up in the upper right-hand corner here of your sheet, they got a another man, do you see Zobah up there, pretty much toward just up north of center of the map? You got Zobah. And then you come down the green line over to there, you got Beth Rehob. Now, these were Syrian forces here that the Ammonites had enlisted. Look back down where Ammon is. Ammon's pretty far away. It's down toward the south. These guys are much more north and of them. And they got another 1,000 men from Maacah, which is further south, and then 12,000 men from Tob, which is across the other side of the Jordan, just a little northeast of Ammon. So if you can find those places, this is where they recruited their mercenary forces from. And so Joab and the Israelite forces went out, and they knew that there were probably some Arameans coming down, and they expected to have this huge fight with a combined army of Ammonites and Arameans that were going to be right there at Rabbah, that would be to the entrance of the city where it talks about the gate. So let me read some other verses as we go here from verse 7. Or 7 and following. David heard about it and sent Joab and all the fighting men. The Ammonites marched out and lined up in battle formation at the entrance to the city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were in the field by themselves. When Joab saw that there was a battle line in front of him and another one behind him, he chose some men out of all the elite troops of Israel and lined up in battle formation to engage the Arameans. He placed the rest of the forces under the command of his brother Abishai, who lined up in battle formation to engage the Ammonites. And if the Arameans are too strong for you and me, Joab said, then you will be my help. However, if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I will come to help you. He tells all the men, be strong. We must prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of our God. May the Lord's will be done. Okay, we'll stop there for that right now. But as we see this, all these hired men that are coming out here, Joab thought they were going to be fighting again right there at the city of Rabbah. But when he got there, there was a different reality on the line. It says here now these men from the Arameans were out in the open fields. Now, where were those open fields? Our text doesn't really tell us where those open fields does, but thankfully in the Word of God, sometimes there are parallel passages and more than one viewpoint coming into play. So let's look at 1 Chronicles 19:7, which is on your sheets there, 19:6 and 7. When the Ammonites saw that they had become a stench to David, Hanun and the Ammonites sent 1,000 talents of silver. This tells us how much they spent, actually, like 750,000 pounds of silver. Talents of silver to the hired chariots and horsemen from Mesopotamia, from Aram, Maacah, and from Zobah. They hired 32,000 chariots, and the king of Maacah and his army, who came and encamped near Medeba. Okay, that's an important piece right there, Medeba. When you look at that second map now, let's go to the bottom left quadrant, right at the bottom. The first thing we see, kind of parallel to Jerusalem to the west, is Medeba. Everybody got that? And then you look up just a little bit. Rabbah, which is now Amman, Jordan, that would be it, is about 20 miles to the north. And so looking at this second map, we see that there's this space between Rabbah, where the Ammonites were drawn up for battle, and Medeba, where the recruited Aramean forces were out in, quote, the open country. Now, this was a sort of an uh-oh moment for Joab and for the Israelites, because as we saw in verses 9 to 14, Joab and the Israelites were hemmed in. They had Ammonites above them, and they had Arameans below them. So Joab took some of the best Israelite soldiers, and he went out against the Arameans because he thought they were the best fighters. And then he says, okay, bro, Abishai, you're going to go against the Ammonites here. We're going to divide our forces up, and if one of us is in trouble, hopefully we'll have the capacity to help the other. But there's really no certainty that either one of them were going to be able to overwhelm the others enough to come back and help their cohort here. So Joab's pre-battle pep talk in verse 13 is just always good advice in any kind of battle. He says, be of good courage. Let us be courageous for our people, for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what seems good to him. So the idea of have courage. He doesn't say don't be afraid. He says face your fears basically with courage, right? You look your fears in the eyes and you move forward anyway. That's courage. Have the concern be for other people and for God himself, and then trust the Lord for the outcome. I mean, that's pretty good advice for just about anything that we're doing in life. But it turns out that Joab and his men did prevail. The Arameans and the Syrians, they fled in retreat. Likewise, Abishai, up against the Ammonites at the city gate there, Rabbah, they also dominated, sending the Ammonites retreating back inside the city gates. And so the Israelites, seemingly now having success on the battlefield, they returned to their homes. And it's interesting that the Israelites did not try to take Rabbah. They didn't go in and try to take that city or that land. Remember, the Israelites here had never intended to fight in the first place. This was not their instigation here. This was the Ammonites who sent the guys back with half a beard and with their genitals hanging out. Okay, this was their fight that they picked. So the Israelites did not attack. It was the Ammonites, and so they went back home in peace. But the peace was short-lived, because we read in verses 15 to 19 that the Syrians now realized that they too had become a stench to David. And let's pick up verses 15 to 19. So, when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer sent messages to bring the Arameans who were across the Euphrates River, and they came to Helam with Shobach, commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. And when this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, went to Helam, and then the Arameans lined up in formation to engage David in battle and fought against him. But the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers, 40,000 foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, commander of the army, who died there. And when all the kings who were Hadadezer's subjects saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel, became their subjects. After this, the Arameans were afraid to ever help the Ammonites again. Now, Hadadezer was the king of Zobah, that city up there that we saw that they first brought some people from. And now Shobach was the commander of his army. So Hadadezer sent for even more Arameans, more Syrians beyond the Euphrates River. So he's casting the net much wider now, and he's saying, we need some more help. These guys are tough. I can bring in more Arameans to come down to help fight with them. And the Arameans probably feared that David was going to have a reprisal for what they had done with the Ammonites, and so they were coming with a preemptive attack was their idea. So on the second map, you can see this red line coming down from the upper right-hand corner. Yeah, that's up there by the Euphrates River. And they're bringing soldiers all the way down there and coming in all the way down to Helam, getting into the Israeli border right there so that they can cross over and try to attack Israel. Now, David heard what was happening, and he quickly called all the Israelite forces to head with him to Helam. And the resulting battle was absolutely disastrous for the Arameans. Okay, even though they had chariots, they had all kinds of men that were coming down, skilled fighters. Verse 18 tells us that David and his forces killed of the Syrians, the men, 700 chariots, 40,000 horsemen. They got the commander of the army, and that doesn't even include the foot soldiers that were killed that day. So we're probably approaching here in like 1 or 2 day battle here, a short battle time. I don't know exactly how long that battle lasted, but almost the number of men in America who died in Vietnam. I mean, this was a huge, huge loss for the Arameans, for 40,000 people. I cannot imagine the bloodshed and the gore that goes along with that. So the end results here are that the Arameans made peace and became servants or vassals of Israel, having to pay tribute to them. The Arameans were now afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. And we see that the territory of Israel was greatly expanded, okay? Look on the back to your third map there, if you can. There, it shows the land King David ruled over at the beginning of his reign, and sort of that darker grayish green there to the east of Philistia and right around the Dead Sea. That was what David kind of had to start with. But in contrast, now look at the territory that's green, that kind of a lighter greenish color there. That's what he ruled over at the end of his kingdom. So it's like his kingdom basically tripled or more in size in terms of the geographic territory of his reign. So in 2 Samuel 10, David didn't set out to take this territory from the Ammonites or the Arameans. He simply wanted to offer condolences to a son of a man who had shown him kindness and hospitality. And that man happened to have been King Nahash, and his son was the new king, Hanun. Nonetheless, in spite of their poor reaction to David's overture, God amplified Israel's territory to the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And this is part of what he had promised in a covenant with Abraham. Look back at Genesis 15:18, the last verse, I think, on our handout sheet today. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your offspring I will give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates." Okay, so God had promised that there was going to be Israeli land starting from the Nile River, the river of Egypt, all the way up to the great river Euphrates, kind of up toward Babylon there, north of Syria now. That was going to be the territory that God had promised to his people. And we see that the territory under David's kingdom almost got there. It was pretty close to that. When you look at all that green territory there, it was just a little bit above the Nile, just a little bit below the Euphrates. But for many religiously conservative Jews, this covenant promise justifies the practice of expanding settlements outside of the current borders of Israel. This would be what they would go back to say, God's promised this land to Israel, and we're going to take it. And as you might expect, this concerns Israel's Arab neighbors who live in that land that Israel wants to take over. Where they know influential people in Israel today still want to take over the land that they now call sometimes Greater Israel. That's sometimes the term that's used for this. Outside of Israel's current borders, but the land that God had promised to Abraham would be Greater Israel. Now, brothers, as we look at King David, pointing to King Jesus here, I think the kindness of King David, which the Ammonites rejected and became hostile to, I think it does parallel the kindness King Jesus expressed when he came to bring peace, to bring consolation, to bring hope, to bring life.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you will join us for the next episode of our study of 2 Samuel. Until then, our prayer is that you will grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ, the Savior and the King.